She looked like shit. And that was the point. For Arya Thorne, the art of becoming invisible wasn't just a skill. It was a goddamn religion. She'd chosen the middle seat on Flight 815's overnight haul to Tokyo, a deliberate self-punishment, a purgatory of cramped limbs and recycled air. Her frayed black hoodie was pulled low, a shroud over eyes that hadn't seen real sleep in 6 years. To the doting grandfather on her left, fawning over pictures of his grandkids, and the impeccably dressed businesswoman on her right, whose fingers danced across a laptop keyboard with silent fury, she was nothing. A ghost. Just another weary soul trying to dissolve into the anonymous hum of a Boeing 737 hurtling across the black expanse of the Pacific. But ghosts have a funny way of being called back to the land of the living. When the captain's voice, a voice that was supposed to be a smooth, baritone lullaby of safety, ripped through the intercom, thin and brittle with a terror he couldn't hide. When a shadow, a sleek, predatory thing with no lights and no soul, began to stalk them through the stratosphere. And when the most dreaded question a passenger could ever hear echoed not as a question, but as a final, desperate prayer from a man who had already accepted death. God help us. Is there anyone on this plane who knows how to fly a fighter jet? The 284 passengers aboard were about to discover that the woman they'd so easily dismissed was their only fucking hope for survival. Before we get back to the chaos at 35,000 feet, I have to ask you something. You hear that question. In that moment, with your heart trying to beat its way out of your chest, what do? Do you stay silent and pray someone else stands up? Or are you the one who answers the call? Let me know in the comments below. And while you're there, absolutely obliterate that subscribe button, because you are not going to want to miss a single, terrifying second of what happens next. The last rays of the setting sun bled across the concrete veins of Chicago O'Hare as passengers for Flight 815 began their ritual procession. Amidst the river of travelers, Arya Thorne moved with the deliberate inertia of someone trying to walk through deep water. Her worn jeans and oversized University of Chicago hoodie were a carefully chosen camouflage. At 36, she was a walking contradiction. A spine that screamed to be ramrod straight but was forced into a slouch, eyes that swept the boarding area with a chilling, practiced precision before she deliberately threw them out of focus, turning the world into a meaningless blur. "Enjoy your flight," the gate agent chirped, her smile a bright, plastic thing. Arya offered a weak twitch of her lips that never came close to her eyes, and shuffled down the jet bridge. The aircraft buzzed with that unique energy of a long-haul flight, a cocktail of anticipation and dread. Businessmen in tailored suits stowed their carry-ons with a geometry born of 1,000,000 air miles. A young family, the Chens, were already deep in a hushed negotiation over who got the window seat. And the flight attendants, led by a woman named Chloe Davis, whose calm demeanor was a masterclass in emotional control, moved through their pre-flight checks with the grace of dancers. Arya found her seat, 27B, a middle seat. Hell on earth for most, but for her, it was a sanctuary of insignificance. She sank into it, relieved to be bracketed, to be contained. To her left, by the window, sat an elderly gentleman named Eleanor Vance, whose kind eyes and gentle smile were an immediate and unwelcome invitation to conversation. To her right, on the aisle, the businesswoman, Ms. Sterling, was already immersed in a spreadsheet that glowed with cold blue light. "Headed to Tokyo for business or pleasure, dear?" Eleanor asked, his voice warm, leaning slightly into her space. "Neither," Arya replied, her voice a low murmur. She pulled her hood further over her face and closed her eyes. A polite but firm, "Fuck off." Eleanor's smile faltered for a moment before he turned back to his tablet, a quiet huff of disappointment in his wake. Arya was an expert in these quiet dismissals, a master of building walls that were just friendly enough not to be rude, but tall enough to be unscalable. A few rows ahead, the Chen family was settling in. Michael and Linda, with their 8-year-old twins, Maya and Leo, were a whirlwind of controlled chaos. Linda caught the eye of a passing flight attendant, offering a silent, apologetic smile that broadcasted a universal parental plea. "We'll try our best, but seriously, no promises." Chloe Davis, the lead flight attendant, had seen it all in her 12 years of service. But tonight, something felt off. She exchanged a look with her colleague, Ken, as they did the final passenger count. They'd both noticed a small group of 4 Marines boarding earlier, returning from a posting in Okinawa. The men were ghosts in their own right, their eyes holding the hollow 1,000-yard stare of those who've seen too much. One of them, a sergeant named Marcus Cole, kept fidgeting with a small, worn photograph, his leg bouncing with a restless, nervous energy. But it wasn't the soldiers who had truly snagged Chloe's attention. It was the man in 42F. He was dressed in a dark, expensive suit, but had a baseball cap pulled low and wore sunglasses despite the dim cabin lighting. He hadn't said a word, just pointed at his boarding pass when greeted. His briefcase, when he lifted it into the overhead bin, seemed impossibly heavy, the muscles in his forearm cording with a strain that was all wrong for a simple carry-on. His name, according to the manifest, was Kenji Tanaka. The cockpit door opened and Captain Miles Corrigan emerged. At 61, with silver hair and a face that was a roadmap of countless journeys, he radiated a lifetime of competence. He'd flown through volcanic ash clouds over Indonesia and navigated typhoons in the South China Sea. But tonight, a strange, cold knot was tightening in his gut. The weather charts promised clear skies and a tailwind, but they couldn't explain the primal sense of unease that prickled his skin. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen." His voice, the familiar pilot's drawl, washed over the cabin. "This is your captain, Miles Corrigan. We're expecting a smooth ride over to Tokyo tonight, with a flight time of around 12.5 hours. The weather is clear all the way to Japan, so just sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight." But as he spoke, his first officer, a young, sharp pilot named Ben Carter, was staring at the radar. "Miles, take a look at this." Corrigan leaned over. "What am I seeing?" "Probably a ghost. Just a faint return at our 7 o'clock, about 40 miles out, moving like a bat out of hell, and it's gone." "Keep an eye on it," Corrigan said, his voice casual. He wasn't going to worry about phantoms. Not yet. Back in 27B, Arya had willed herself into a state that mimicked sleep. Her breathing was even, but it wasn't the deep, rhythmic breath of rest. It was the controlled respiration of a predator waiting in ambush. Inside her hoodie pocket, her fingers would occasionally twitch, a phantom muscle memory of a joystick grip that hadn't been there for years. Eleanor Vance glanced at her from time to time, an unsettling feeling growing in his chest. There was a stillness about the young woman, a coiled tension that felt dangerously out of place. The 777 pushed back from the gate with its symphony of mechanical groans and whirs. The safety video played to an audience of bowed heads, all absorbed in their final seconds of digital connection before the mandatory airplane mode. It was during the taxi to the runway that the first anomaly occurred. A deep, resonant thud echoed from the cargo hold. It was sharp, metallic, and loud enough to make a dozen passengers look up. The plane kept moving, but the flight attendants froze for a single, synchronized heartbeat. Chloe quickly grabbed the intercom. "Folks, that was just a bit of luggage shifting in the cargo hold. Perfectly normal. We'll have everything secured for takeoff." But her eyes met Ken's, and the look they exchanged was anything but normal. Cargo didn't shift like that. Not with that kind of violent, percussive impact. In seat 42F, Kenji Tanaka shifted. His hands, which had been perfectly still, now had a fine tremor. He reached up, pulled his heavy briefcase from the overhead, and placed it under the seat in front of him. His movements were too precise, too deliberate. As the plane lined up on the runway, Captain Corrigan did something unusual. He walked through the cabin one last time, a final check. His eyes were a scanner, assessing every passenger. The exhausted Marines, the anxious Chen family, the focused business travelers. His gaze rested on Arya for a fraction of a second longer than the others. Something about her posture, even feigning sleep. The way her feet were planted, ready to move. The precise placement of her hands. He'd seen that kind of coiled readiness before, in Special Forces operators he'd flown out of war zones. He filed the observation away as the call came from the cockpit. "Flight attendants, prepare for takeoff." The massive engines spooled up with their soul-stirring roar, pressing everyone into their seats as Flight 815 devoured the runway. The nose lifted, and they were free. Chicago fell away, a glittering carpet of light on a sea of black. For the first hour, the flight was a portrait of routine. The seatbelt sign pinged off, drink carts roamed the aisles, and passengers settled into the long-haul rhythm. Movies flickered to life, books were opened, and many, like Arya, appeared to sleep. But she wasn't sleeping. Behind her closed eyelids, her mind was a whirlwind of calculations she hadn't consciously made in years. The rate of climb, the subtle hum of the engines, the minute course corrections. Old habits don't just die hard, they lie in wait, dormant for the right trigger. In that twilight state, memories flickered like faulty wiring, the suffocating weight of a flight helmet, the brutal, crushing embrace of G-forces, the voice of her wingman, a ghost in the static. "Viper on your 6. She shoved the memories down, burying them under a layer of forced calm. That was another life. Another woman wore that call sign. She was just Arya Thorne now, an analyst heading to a conference she had no intention of attending. The ticket was just an excuse to be in the sky, to feel that familiar, bittersweet ache of leaving the earth behind, even as a prisoner in a metal tube. Outside the window, a shadow detached itself from the clouds. It moved with an impossible, silent grace, paralleling their course from a higher altitude. But the Chen twins were mesmerized by a cartoon on their tablet, and Eleanor Vance was lost in a historical novel, and the shadow passed, for the moment, unseen. In the cockpit, Ben Carter was frowning again. "Miles, that Phantom is back. Stronger this time." Corrigan looked. "Range?" 20 miles in closing. Its velocity doesn't match any commercial traffic. Could be military. There's a joint exercise scheduled near the Aleutians." "Could be," Ben said, but his tone was laced with doubt. Military exercises were broadcast. This thing was silent, a ghost on the radar. The plane had been airborne for nearly 2 hours when the first real jolt hit. This wasn't the gentle sway of turbulence. This was a violent, lateral slam that felt like the hand of a giant had swatted them out of the sky. Drinks launched from tray tables, overhead bins rattled violently, and a laptop went skittering down the aisle. Maya Chen let out a terrified shriek, instantly enveloped by her mother's arms. But Linda Chen's own eyes were wide with a fear she was struggling to contain. Arya's eyes snapped open. Her body reacted before her mind could, her feet instinctively widening their stance on the floor, her hands gripping the armrests not with the white-knuckled grip of panic, but with the measured pressure of someone assessing instability. Eleanor Vance, who had grabbed her arm in a moment of fear, was stunned to see that the young woman wasn't even breathing hard. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Corrigan." His voice came over the intercom, and this time, the reassuring drawl was gone, replaced by a strained metallic edge. "We're hitting some, unexpected atmospheric disturbance. Please return to your seats immediately and fasten your seatbelts. Flight attendants, take your seats. But Corrigan knew this wasn't the atmosphere. The radar was a pristine map of clear, calm air. The aircraft's sensors detected no wind shear, which meant something else had hit them. Something solid. In seat 42F, Kenji Tanaka was gripping his armrests so hard his knuckles were bone white. Sweat glistened on his forehead, and he was whispering to himself in rapid-fire Japanese. The student next to him, a kid named Tyler, tried to lean away. "You okay, man?" Tyler asked, instantly regretting it. Tanaka's head whipped around. For a second, Tyler saw his eyes behind the dark glasses. They were wide, with a chilling, absolute terror. "They're early," Tanaka hissed, more to himself than to Tyler. "They were not supposed to be here yet." He clutched his briefcase, pulling it onto his lap. Chloe Davis, strapped into her jump seat, saw the exchange. Every instinct, honed over a decade of watching people, was screaming that Tanaka was the epicenter of whatever was wrong. She caught Ken's eye and gave a subtle nod toward 42F. He'd seen it too. Little Leo Chen had his face pressed to the window, the glow from his tablet illuminating his wide eyes. "Daddy," he said, tugging on Michael's sleeve. "Daddy, there's another plane out there. It's okay, buddy. Just another flight," Michael said, trying to soothe his son. "No, Daddy, it's close. It's really, really close." Michael leaned over to look. He saw nothing but the vast, empty darkness and the pinprick of stars. Then, something blotted them out. A shape, long, sleek, and impossibly black against the starfield, no more than a few hundred yards away. It was gone in a blink, a phantom image burned onto his retina. In 27B, Arya had heard the boy. Without moving her head, she shifted her gaze, trying to catch a reflection in the windows across the aisle. Her eyes, trained to see things other people missed, caught it. The faint, ghostly reflection of a form that had no navigation lights, moving in a way that defied every rule of commercial aviation. The plane jolted again, a strange, sickening roll this time. This wasn't a disturbance. Arya knew the feeling instantly. Wake vortex. The invisible tornado of air spun from the wings of another aircraft. But to hit wake turbulence this strong, another plane would have to be dangerously, suicidally close. She was fully awake now. The fog of her self-imposed anonymity burned away by a sudden, cold fire of adrenaline. She kept her eyes half-lidded, maintaining the illusion of a drowsy passenger. But her mind was a supercomputer, running scenarios. The repeated impacts, the impossible proximity of another aircraft, the bizarre behavior of the man in 42F. They were all pieces of a terrifying puzzle she couldn't stop herself from solving. Chloe had made a decision. Ignoring the seatbelt sign, she unbuckled and made her way, hand over hand, toward the cockpit. She knocked the emergency code. 3 short, 2 long. Urgent, but not a hijacking. Corrigan cracked the door. "Chloe, you need to be seated." "Captain, we have a situation in 42F. Passenger is acting erratically, and whatever this is," she gestured to the shuddering cabin, "I think he was expecting it." Corrigan's face hardened. He glanced at Ben, who was white as a sheet, staring at the radar. "We're being painted," he said, his voice a whisper. "There's an aircraft shadowing us, flying in our blind spot. It's not responding on any frequency, not even guard." Chloe's blood ran cold. The guard frequency was the emergency channel. If they weren't responding on guard, they weren't being silent by accident. They were being silent by design. "What's the protocol?" she asked. "Keep an eye on Tanaka. Don't create a panic. I'm going to come back and take a look in a few minutes. Routine check." Chloe nodded, her professional mask back in place. She made her way back down the aisle, offering calm words about the turbulence. When she reached 42F, she pretended to check the overhead bin, giving her a clear view of Tanaka. He was clutching something in his hand now, a small, thick satellite phone. Back in her seat, Arya watched it all. She saw Chloe's forced calm, the tension in her shoulders. She saw Tanaka's nervous energy, the way he checked his watch, a high-end military-grade chronometer that was completely at odds with a simple business traveler. Another passenger had noticed, too. Mark Rizzo, a man in his late 50s whose sharp eyes and quiet observation screamed "cop" to anyone who knew the signs, had shifted in his seat for a better view of 42F. 25 years as a detective in the Chicago PD had given him a sixth sense for trouble, and right now, that sense was blaring like a klaxon. The plane lurched again, a violent drop that sent stomachs into throats, a few oxygen masks deployed from the ceiling, dangling for a horrifying moment before retracting. A system malfunction that shouldn't happen without a total loss of cabin pressure. A few screams broke the tense silence. Someone started to pray. The Chen twins buried their faces in their parents' shoulders. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain." Corrigan's voice was audibly strained. "We seem to be experiencing some instrument malfunctions. Nothing to be alarmed about. I'm going to ask everyone to remain seated as we may need to make some abrupt altitude changes." But Arya heard the code in his words. Instrument malfunctions didn't drop oxygen masks. Altitude changes meant evasive maneuvers. Whatever was out there was becoming more aggressive. Suddenly, Tanaka stood up, ignoring the illuminated seatbelt sign, and strode toward the rear lavatory. Chloe moved to intercept him, but he was surprisingly fast, locking himself inside before she could reach the door. She pressed her ear against it and heard him talking, his voice low and urgent in Japanese. He was on the sat phone. Rizzo had seen enough. He unbuckled and positioned himself near the lavatory, a silent, unmoving sentinel. He caught Chloe's eye and gave a single, sharp nod. "I've got your back." In the cockpit, Ben was losing it. "Miles, it's anticipating us. Every course correction we make, it mirrors it instantly. This isn't shadowing. We're being herded." Corrigan had flown for 40 years. He'd faced engine failures over mountains and hijacking threats over oceans. But this was different. This was alien. "Try ATC again," he ordered. "Declare an emergency. Use back channels. Let them know we've gone dark and have a hostile escort." Ben keyed the radio, using subtle, coded phrases that any controller would recognize as a mayday without alerting listening ears. The response was a wall of static. Then, for a terrifying second, a new voice broke through. It wasn't air traffic control. It was cold, synthesized, and spoke perfect English. "Flight 815, cease all transmissions. Maintain your present course and altitude. Comply, and your passengers will be spared." Corrigan and Ben stared at each other. This wasn't a malfunction. This wasn't a military exercise. This was an act of airborne piracy. Back in the cabin, Arya knew she couldn't hide anymore. The charade was over. She opened her eyes, sat up straight, and the entire energy around her shifted. The slouch was gone, replaced by a spine of steel. The unfocused gaze was gone, replaced by an analytical fire. Eleanor Vance, who was clutching his novel like a holy relic, saw the transformation. "My dear," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. You're not just an analyst, are you?" Arya turned to him, and for the first time, he saw what was really in her eyes. It wasn't fatigue, it was fire. It was a depth of experience that made his blood run cold. "Sir," Arya said, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of command. "In a few minutes, things are going to get very, very loud. When they do, I need you to stay low and listen to the flight attendants. Can you do that?" Eleanor could only nod, suddenly realizing the tired young woman in the middle seat might be the most dangerous person on the plane. The lavatory door hissed open, and Tanaka emerged, his face ashen. He looked around wildly, then his eyes locked onto Arya's. A flicker of something, not recognition of her, but of her type, crossed his face. He recognized the predator in her. He started to back away, but Rizzo was there, blocking his path. "Sir," the ex-cop said, his voice a low growl, "I think you need to sit down." "You don't understand," Tanaka stammered, his Japanese accent thick with fear. "They are here. They want the package. They want the keys." "What keys?" Rizzo demanded. Just then, Captain Corrigan came out of the cockpit, his face a mask of grim determination. His eyes swept the cabin, landing on Tanaka, then on Rizzo, then on Chloe trying to calm the passengers, and finally, on Arya. Their eyes met, and in that instant, he saw it. The same thing he'd seen in the eyes of the Special Forces operators. He'd flown with men and women like her. He knew what she was. He made his way back to the cockpit, his mind racing. They were hours from the nearest friendly airbase. They had a hostile, unidentified aircraft on their tail, a passenger who was clearly at the center of this, and no way to call for help. He was out of time and out of options. That's when the sky outside the starboard windows lit up with a brilliant, blinding flash. A high-pitched shriek tore through the air, followed by a concussive boom that shook the 777 to its core. The shadowing aircraft had just fired a missile. It hadn't hit them. It had detonated a few hundred yards off their wing. A warning shot, a promise of what came next. The cabin detonated into pure, primal chaos. Screams, sobs, prayers in a dozen languages. The Chen family clung to each other. Strangers grabbed hold of one another. The four Marines snapped into action, their training overriding their fear, even though they were utterly helpless. And in seat 27B, Arya Thorne closed her eyes for one final second, took a single, deep, centering breath, and let the ghost die. When she opened them, she was no longer hiding. The mask was gone. Standing in its place was Major Arya Thorne, callsign Viper, once the most decorated and controversial F-35 pilot in the United States Air Force, before she was erased from service for reasons sealed under layers of black ink and national security. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood, her voice a blade that sliced through the pandemonium. "Everyone, be quiet and listen to me now. Crew, emergency protocols. Now." The cabin fell silent. Every terrified eye turned to her. Captain Corrigan, standing in the cockpit doorway, felt a dizzying wave of both relief and dread. A miracle had just arrived. But he had no idea if it was the kind that saved you or the kind that got you all killed. The silence Arya commanded was a fragile, crystalline thing, threatening to shatter at the slightest sound. 284 souls held their breath, their terror momentarily eclipsed by the sheer, unshakable authority of the woman standing in the aisle. Captain Corrigan moved toward her, his face a canvas of desperation and disbelief. The plane bucked again, a violent reminder that the monster outside wasn't waiting for introductions. "Ma'am," Corrigan said, his voice low, "I don't know who the hell you are, but if you know anything that can help us—" "Major Arya Thorne," she said, her voice devoid of emotion, meeting his gaze. "United States Air Force, former F-35 squadron leader, and right now, Captain, I need you to tell me exactly what the fuck is happening in your cockpit." Corrigan's eyes widened. Thorne. Viper Thorne. The name was a legend, whispered in simulator rooms and late-night officers' clubs. The pilot who could make a $50 million jet dance on a razor's edge. The one who had vanished after the Kashmir incident, her entire record classified and buried. "We've got a hostile escort," he said, speaking quickly. "Stealth airframe, not responding, jamming all our comms. They just put a missile off our starboard wing." Arya's jaw clenched. She glanced towards the window, her mind instantly processing vectors, airspeeds, and engagement envelopes. "How long have they been on us?" "First contact almost 2 hours ago. They've been mirroring every move we make." "Let me see your flight deck," she said. It wasn't a request. She was already moving. Then, raising her voice to the cabin, she commanded, "Everyone stays in their seats. Flight attendants secure the galleys and prepare for high-G maneuvers." Chloe Davis, her own fear momentarily forgotten, immediately began shouting orders to her crew. The authority in Arya's voice was absolute. This was someone who lived and breathed crisis. As they reached the cockpit door, Corrigan paused. "I have to ask. Your record. The way you left." "Captain," Arya said, her voice sharp and urgent, "in approximately 45 seconds, that aircraft is going to make another pass, this time closer. They're bracketing us, testing our response time. You can read my classified file later, assuming we have a later. Right now, I'm the only person on this plane who can get us through this." Corrigan made the only choice he could. He pushed open the cockpit door and ushered her inside. First Officer Ben Carter looked up, his face a mask of shock and confusion. "Miles, who is this?" "She's the cavalry," Corrigan said grimly. "Show her everything." Arya leaned over the instrument panel, her eyes absorbing the data with terrifying speed. The sleepy, anonymous passenger was gone. In her place was a creature of pure, lethal focus. Her movements were economical, precise. "There," she pointed at a ghost on the tactical display. "See that flight pattern? They're staying just inside your radar's refresh rate, popping in and out. They know the 777 systems better than you do. This isn't some rogue state. These are top-tier professionals." The radio crackled, the same synthesized dead voice. "Flight 815, you will begin a descent to flight level 100. You have 90 seconds to comply." 10,000 feet, Ben stammered. "Over the middle of the Pacific? They're forcing us to ditch." "No," Arya corrected him, her voice chillingly calm. "They're forcing us low enough for a mid-air extraction. They want what Tanaka has, and they're going to board us in the sky to get it." Corrigan stared at her. That's impossible." "It's been done," Arya said quietly. "Twice. Both were classified special operations. Both required an inside man." Her eyes narrowed. "Tanaka isn't their target. He's their asset." Back in the cabin, the fragile calm was breaking. Tanaka, the man in 42F, had curled into a ball, clutching his briefcase to his chest. Rizzo, the ex-cop, had moved, now sitting directly across the aisle from him, a silent, immovable obstacle. The Chen family was huddled together, Linda whispering a story to her twins, her voice shaking. Sergeant Cole and his 3 Marines had, without a word, spread out through the cabin, their presence a small, defiant gesture of order in the escalating chaos. Eleanor Vance, in his window seat, had closed his eyes and was praying, his novel lying forgotten. But his thoughts were on the empty middle seat next to him and the terrifying, magnificent woman who had occupied it. In the cockpit, Arya was in her element. "Captain, I need you to key the radio on the guard frequency. Don't transmit, just key the mic 4 times. Short, 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 long. It's an old pilot's distress signal, Morse code for V." For Viper. "If there's anyone out there, anyone at all, they'll know." "What good will that do if they're jamming us?" Corrigan asked, but he was already doing it. "Jamming isn't a perfect bubble. There are leaks. We just need one friendly ear to hear it." She turned to Ben. "Initiate a descent, but a slow one. Bleed altitude at 500 feet per minute. Make it look like we're complying, but fighting a control issue. Buy me time." "Time for what?" Ben asked, his hands trembling as he adjusted the controls. "Time to change the rules of the game," Arya said. She looked at Corrigan. "I need to talk to Tanaka. I need to know what's in that case. It's too dangerous." "Captain, the time for safe ended when that missile went off. That man is the key. I'm going to him." She started to leave, then paused in the doorway. "And Captain, whatever happens, do not let them take you below 8,000 feet. At that altitude, they can match our speed and board. Above it, we still have a fighting chance." Arya moved back through the cabin with a predator's grace. She stopped at several rows, offering a quiet word, a reassuring look. To the untrained eye, she was an off-duty crew member helping out. But her path was a deliberate, calculated line to seat 42F. She didn't kneel. She stood over Tanaka, her shadow falling over him. Her voice was low, but it cut through his fear like a scalpel. "They're not here to rescue you, are they? They're here for the keys. You were supposed to make the transfer. But you're a loose end. Once they have them, they're going to kill you and everyone else on this plane." Tanaka's head snapped up, his eyes wide with terror behind his sunglasses. How could you know?" "Because that's how this works," Arya said. "What are the keys for, Kenji? What's in the case?" He clutched the briefcase tighter. "Not keys," he whispered, his voice cracking. "A key. A quantum encryption device. It can unlock the entire global financial market. It doesn't just steal money, it can erase it. It can rewrite economic reality. It could plunge the world into a chaos that would make wars look like street fights." Arya's blood went cold. This wasn't about a simple ransom. This was about holding the entire world hostage. "Who are they?" she pressed. "Mercenaries, the best. They call themselves the Phantoms. Their leader—" Tanaka stopped, his face turning a shade of gray. "What about their leader?" "He was one of you. American military, a pilot. They said he was a ghost in the sky, that he couldn't be beaten. They call him Ghost." Arya felt the floor drop out from beneath her. Ghost. There was only one pilot who had ever been called that. A man she had trained with, flown with, fought beside. A man she had once considered a brother. Leo Vance, her former wingman. The man whose career was destroyed in the same fire that had consumed her own, 6 years ago over the snow-capped peaks of Kashmir. She straightened up slowly, her mind reeling. If Leo was out there, this wasn't just a hijacking. It was a reckoning. He knew her tactics, her tells, her breaking points, and he knew, better than anyone, that she would burn the world to the ground to protect innocent people. He was counting on it. "Stay in your seat," she told Tanaka. "Do not move." She turned and made her way back toward the front, but stopped at Rizzo's seat. Their eyes met in a moment of silent understanding. "You're law enforcement," she stated. "Retired," Rizzo confirmed. "Detective, Chicago PD." "I need you," she said simply. "That briefcase cannot fall into their hands. If Tanaka tries to make a move, you stop him. By any means necessary." Rizzo's eyes hardened. He gave a single, sharp nod. "Who the hell are you?" "The woman who's going to get us out of this," Arya said, already moving away. The plane suddenly banked hard right, throwing unbuckled passengers from their seats. Through the windows, the hostile aircraft was now flying in formation with them, so close they could see the sleek, angular lines of its design. It was a modified stealth fighter. A prototype, maybe. Something that shouldn't exist outside of a black budget program. Screams filled the cabin again. The Chen twins were crying hysterically. The Marines were on their feet, trying to help people who had been thrown to the floor. Arya reached the cockpit just as Corrigan was coming out. "They're boxing us in," he said, his professional calm completely gone. "They're trying to force us into a controlled stall." "Let me talk to him," Arya said. "They're not talking." "He'll talk to me." She pushed past him and grabbed the radio handset. She bypassed the standard frequencies, and switched to a narrow-band, encrypted channel that only a handful of pilots in the world were cleared to use. She spoke one word, a call sign that hadn't been spoken in 6 years. "Ghost, this is Viper, let's talk." For a long, agonizing moment, there was only static. Then, a voice she knew as well as her own, a voice that had haunted her nightmares, came through the speakers. It was older, harder, but it was unmistakably Leo Vance. "Well, I'll be damned. Viper, I wondered if that was you when the plan went to shit. Of course it was you. It was always you. Flying commercial, Arya? How the mighty have fallen." Ben Carter looked at her in stunned silence. She knew the man trying to kill them. "Leo, whatever they're paying you, it's not worth this," Arya said, her voice a low, steady growl. "This isn't about money," Leo shot back, and she could hear the old, familiar arrogance in his voice. "This is about justice. We just want what your friend Tanaka is carrying. Hand him and the case over, and you all get to see tomorrow." "You know I can't do that." "No, you won't do that," he sneered, still playing the hero, still clinging to the rules, even after those rules got us crucified, after they threw us to the wolves for doing our job in Kashmir. His words were a physical blow, but she kept her voice level. "This isn't about Kashmir. This is about 284 innocent people." "Everything is about Kashmir, Arya," he roared, and the raw fury in his voice shook the cockpit. "That's where you and I learned what their rules are really worth. Nothing." The phantom jet outside pulled even closer, its wingtip a mere 20 feet from their own. The immense pressure wave from its engines made the 777 shudder and groan. Corrigan was fighting the controls, his knuckles white. Any sudden move, any mistake, and the two aircraft would tear each other apart. "Leo, back off," Arya commanded, her voice the cold crack of a whip. "You're endangering both aircraft." "Negative, Viper. You have something I want. You can either be the hero and cooperate, or you can be the reason everyone on this flying bus dies screaming." Through the cockpit windows, Arya could see the pilot in the other aircraft more clearly. A dark helmet, a black visor. It was impossible to see his face, but she didn't need to. She could feel his rage, his resentment, radiating across the few feet of empty space that separated them. "How's our fuel?" she asked Corrigan, without taking her eyes off Leo's jet. "Enough to get to Tokyo with reserves, but if we have to fight him..." "We won't last an hour," she finished. He knew it, and he was counting on it. Back in the cabin, Chloe was fighting a losing battle against the rising tide of panic. The sight of the hostile fighter jet hanging off their wing was undeniable proof that this was not turbulence. Tanaka had gone completely catatonic, his eyes wide and unseeing. Rizzo had moved closer, now sitting on the armrest of the seat next to him. "Whatever's in that case," the ex-cop said quietly to Tanaka. "It's not worth this. Give it up." "You don't understand," Tanaka whispered. "If he gets the key, it's not just the market. He can trigger automated liquidations, erase national debts, create a financial apocalypse. Billions of people will suffer. Billions." "Billions versus 284, Rizzo said, the grim math hanging in the air. "That's the choice." Suddenly, from his window seat, Eleanor Vance spoke, his voice surprisingly firm. "That woman, Major Thorne, she will find a way. You see her eyes? I saw eyes like that once before, on a young man in a landing craft at Normandy. He was terrified, but he was the one who got them up the beach. She's one of them, the ones who run toward the fire." In the cockpit, Arya was running through every combat scenario she'd ever trained for. She knew Leo's flying style. He was aggressive, brilliant, but prone to arrogance. He always pushed too hard, too fast. It made him a fearsome opponent, but it also made him predictable. "Captain," she said to Corrigan, "I need you to begin a slow climbing turn to port, heading 330. That takes us further out over the ocean. Trust me. And increase our speed by 20 knots. Make it gradual." Corrigan, having surrendered all hope in his own abilities, complied without question. The massive airliner began to slowly bank and accelerate. "What are you doing, Viper?" Leo's voice crackled over the radio. "Don't get cute." "Just trying to find a smoother altitude, Ghost," she replied, her voice deceptively calm. "The passengers are getting nervous." But she was lying. She was repositioning them, slowly, deliberately, so that the moon, a brilliant silver disk in the black sky, would be directly at her back. It was a classic dogfighting tactic. Use the environment as a weapon. Leo would see it eventually, but she was betting his ego would make him dismiss it. "I have to go back there," she told Corrigan. "Keep him talking. Ask him about his plane, his fuel, his favorite goddamn color. Anything to keep his mind occupied. And whatever you do, do not let him take you below 20,000 feet." She left the cockpit and walked directly to Tanaka. She didn't bother being discreet. She stood in the aisle, an island of calm in the sea of fear. "Kenji, the man in that plane is Leo Vance. I know him. He's a monster, but he's a predictable monster. We can beat him. But I need to know everything about that device. Is there a fail-safe? A dead man's switch? A way to destroy it?" Tanaka hesitated. It's keyed to my biometrics. If my heart stops, the device initiates a total data purge. It fries itself." Arya's eyes went cold. The ultimate dead man's switch. Leo couldn't just kill Tanaka and take the case. He needed him alive, at least for now. The Marines had been listening. Sergeant Cole stood up. "Ma'am, Major, we're at your disposal. Tell us what to do." Arya looked at the 4 soldiers. Trained killers, trapped in a metal tube with no weapons. "I need you to be the calm. Go through the cabin, help the flight attendants, reassure people. If anyone panics, you handle it. Quietly. The last thing we need is a riot." "Yes, ma'am," Cole said, and the 4 Marines immediately dispersed, their sense of purpose restored. The plane suddenly dropped again, this time with a sickening lurch. Through the windows, they could see Leo's jet had moved, now flying directly above them, a black cross against the moonlit clouds, its shadow draping their aircraft like a shroud. "Ladies and gentlemen," Corrigan's voice was shaking, "we're in a bit of a traffic jam up here. Please, stay in your seats." Arya knew what Leo was doing. It was an intimidation tactic, a predator asserting its dominance. She'd seen him do it in training a dozen times. Probe, push, intimidate, and then, when the opponent is rattled, strike. She started back toward the cockpit, but a sudden commotion stopped her. A woman, a quiet passenger who had been sitting a few rows behind Arya, was on her feet and moving toward the emergency exit over the wing. Rizzo was already moving to intercept, but the woman was fast. "Nobody move!" she screamed, and in her hand was the glint of sharpened plastic. A shiv, likely fashioned from a toothbrush or a pen in the lavatory. The cabin, which had been simmering with fear, now boiled over into outright panic. "What do you want?" Arya asked, her voice dangerously calm as she turned to face the woman. "The case!" the woman shrieked, her eyes wild. "Give me the case! I open the door, they come in, they take it, and they leave. Everyone lives." "You open that door at this altitude and everyone dies," Arya said flatly. "Not if we go down first. Tell the captain. 10,000 feet. So that was it. The inside help wasn't Tanaka. It was her. Leo had a backup plan. "You're assuming he'll let you live," Arya said, taking a slow, deliberate step toward the woman. "You're assuming Leo Vance keeps his promises, but you weren't there in Kashmir, were you?" "Stay back!" the woman screamed, waving the makeshift weapon. Arya kept coming, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "He's going to kill us all anyway. You, me, Tanaka, the children in row 15. Because that's what he is now. That's what he became after. She let the sentence hang in the air. After what? The woman demanded, her hand starting to shake. After I shot him down, Arya said quietly. The confession sucked the air out of the cabin. Passengers who were listening gasped. Rizzo froze mid-stride. 6 years ago, Arya continued, her eyes locked on the woman's. Leo and I were on a covert mission. We were ordered to strike a target believed to be a terrorist training camp, but the intel was wrong. It was a refugee shelter. I saw children playing in the dirt. I refused the order. Leo didn't. He opened fire. The woman's weapon was wavering now, her resolve crumbling. I engaged his aircraft, Arya said, her voice like ice. I disabled his weapons systems and forced him to retreat, but not before his first pass. Not before 17 civilians were dead. The Air Force buried it. They dishonorably discharged me for firing on a friendly asset, and they let Leo disappear. I thought he was rotting in a military prison. I was wrong. She was close enough now. In a single, fluid motion that was too fast to see, she seized the woman's wrist, twisted, and a sharp crack echoed through the cabin. The shiv clattered to the floor. The woman screamed, clutching her broken arm. Rizzo was there an instant later, securing her. Take her to the back, Arya ordered. Use a seatbelt to restrain her. As Rizzo dragged the screaming woman away, Arya grabbed the nearest intercom handset. Ladies and gentlemen, the situation is under control. Stay calm. But she knew it was a lie. Leo had played his hand and lost. He wouldn't retreat. He'd escalate. As if on cue, the cockpit radio blared to life, Leo's voice filling the cabin through the still-open cockpit door. Impressive, Viper. You always were a bitch in close quarters, but this isn't close quarters anymore. You're in a flying school bus, and I'm in a goddamn F-35 on steroids. Last chance. The case, or I start taking you apart, piece by piece. Arya sprinted back to the cockpit. He's bluffing. He needs Tanaka alive. Are you sure about that? Corrigan asked. Before she could answer, a streak of white fire shot past the cockpit window. A cannon round. It didn't hit them, but it was close enough for them to hear the supersonic crack as it passed. That wasn't a bluff, Ben said, his voice a terrified whisper. Arya grabbed the radio. Leo, you fire on this aircraft again and Tanaka dies. He's rigged the case to his heart rate. His heart stops. The key is wiped forever. It was a lie, built on a kernel of truth. She glanced back, catching Rizzo's eye. She mouthed the words, "Play along." He nodded. You're lying, Leo's voice came back, but for the first time there was a flicker of uncertainty in it. Am I? Arya challenged. You know me, Leo. You know I always have a contingency plan. You taught me that yourself. Remember? Always have an out. Silence. Outside, the Phantom jet pulled back slightly, no longer in their wing wash, but still a predatory shadow. Here's the new deal, Arya said, seizing control. We continue to Tokyo. You can follow us if you want, but you keep your distance. We land, we negotiate, but you so much as scratch the paint on this plane again, you get nothing. Ever. You don't get to make the deals anymore, Viper. You're not a major. You're a nobody. Maybe, Arya said, her voice a low, dangerous growl. But I'm the nobody standing between you and your prize, and we both know I've beaten you before. The silence on the radio stretched into an eternity. Corrigan and Ben watched her, their own lives hanging on the outcome of this high-stakes poker game. Finally, Leo's voice returned, cold and lethal. You've got 90 minutes, Arya. 90 minutes to land this thing and give me what I want. And believe me, after what you did to me in Kashmir, I'm highly motivated to see this end with you burning. The radio went dead. Outside, the Phantom held its position. A silent, patient killer. Arya turned to Corrigan. We just bought ourselves 90 minutes. How far are we from friendly airspace? At this speed, 2 hours, maybe more. She closed her eyes, her mind a whirlwind of calculations. They needed to stretch those 90 minutes. They needed a miracle. And then, a miracle happened. I'm getting something, Ben stammered, pointing at a small, flickering light on his comms panel. A coded military squawk. It's that V signal you sent out. Arya grabbed a headset. Through a wall of static, a voice, faint but clear, cut through. It was a voice she hadn't heard in 6 years, but would recognize in her grave. General Wallace, her old commanding officer. Viper, this is Olympus. We read you. We've been tracking a ghost aircraft in your vicinity for the last hour. Help is on the way. But you need to buy us 30 minutes. Can you do that, Major? 30 minutes. Against Leo Vance, who knew her every move, in a commercial airliner that handled like a pregnant whale. Roger, Olympus, she said, her voice steady. We'll buy you 30. She hung up the headset and looked at Corrigan and Ben, a cold, dangerous fire in her eyes. Gentlemen, buckle up. We're about to do some flying that is not in your training manual. Corrigan gripped the yoke, his fear replaced by a sliver of awe-inspired hope. We're with you, Major. She wasn't a major. Not anymore. But in the cold, dark emptiness over the Pacific, with 284 lives in her hands and the ghost of her past on her tail, she would have to become everything she once was, and more. The clock was ticking. 30 minutes to save the world. Okay, we have to pause right here. A disgraced pilot, a stolen superweapon, and a duel in the sky against her own haunted past. If your heart is pounding as hard as mine, show some love and smash that like button. And I'm serious. What do you think her first move is? How do you fight a stealth fighter with a passenger jet? Drop your craziest ideas in the comments. Now, let's get back to the insanity. The 30-minute countdown was a death sentence. Arya stood in the cockpit doorway, a bridge between the sterile, high-tech world of the flight deck and the cabin filled with raw, human fear. Her mind was a battlefield of combat tactics, while her eyes remained locked on the phantom jet, a sliver of obsidian against the star-dusted velvet of the night sky. Captain, she said to Corrigan, I want you to start bleeding airspeed. Drop at 5 knots, then another 5. Make it look like we're having engine trouble, like we can't maintain speed at this altitude. That'll make us an easier target, Ben protested, his voice tight. It'll also force Leo to slow down, Arya countered. That jet he's flying is built for speed and stealth, not for loitering. Flying slow burns his fuel like crazy. He's been up here for hours. He's got to be running low. Corrigan complied, gently easing back on the throttles. The hum of the massive GE engines changed pitch slightly, a subtle shift that sent a fresh wave of anxiety through the cabin. Outside, the Phantom adjusted, its movements sharp, precise, a stark contrast to the 777's deliberate, sluggish response. In the main cabin, the passengers were fraying at the edges. The Chen twins had fallen into a shocked, silent state that was more terrifying to their parents than their earlier screams. Linda Chen held them, whispering a Chinese folk tale about a clever monkey outsmarting a fearsome dragon, praying her children only heard the story and not the tremor in her voice. Kenji Tanaka, spurred into action by Arya's commands, had his briefcase open. It wasn't full of money or weapons, but a complex array of circuitry and cooling fans, all surrounding a single glowing quantum processor. His fingers flew across a holographic interface, methodically building firewalls, creating ghost data, doing everything he could to protect the key from whatever electronic assault was surely coming. Rizzo, having secured the accomplice in the rear galley with a combination of duct tape and seatbelt extensions, now stood guard over Tanaka. The woman, whose name was Eva, sat slumped in a jump seat, defeated. "You're all dead," she muttered to Rizzo. When he doesn't get what he wants, he sanitizes the scene. No witnesses, no survivors. Then why help him? Rizzo asked, his voice a low rumble. "He has my son," she whispered, tears tracking through the grime on her face. "He promised he'd be safe if I did my part." Sergeant Cole approached Arya. "Major, my men are in position. The passengers are as calm as they can be. What's next?" Arya looked at him, then at the 3 other Marines. They were trained for ground pounding, for close-quarters battle. Here, they were just passengers with more discipline. But that discipline could be a weapon. "Sergeant, I need you to prep the cabin for a possible ditching. I don't think it'll come to that, but we need to be ready. Get life vests on the children and the elderly first. Do it quietly. Tell people it's just a precaution." "Aye, ma'am." Cole and his men moved off, their quiet efficiency a small anchor of sanity in the swirling chaos. The plane suddenly banked sharply, not from the pilot's controls but from a powerful pressure wave. Through the port side windows, passengers screamed. A second Phantom jet had materialized out of the darkness, rising from below like a creature from the deep. "Christ, there's 2 of them!" Corrigan's voice was a raw nerve of panic. Arya was back in the cockpit in a heartbeat, her mind processing the new, catastrophic variable. Leo had a wingman. He wasn't just arrogant, he was thorough. A new voice, female, clipped, and devoid of any human warmth, came over the radio. "Flight 815, this is Phantom 2. We now have you bracketed. Your compliance window has expired." "Arya?" Leo's voice cut in, laced with smug satisfaction. "Meet my new partner. She's a real artist. You taught me about force multiplication, remember? Never enter a fight you can't win." She remembered. She drilled it into him over and over in the dusty heat of a Nevada training range. He had learned his lessons too well. "Captain, maintain course," Arya ordered. "No sudden moves. Ben, what's our position?" "About 800 miles northeast of Midway Atoll. We're in the middle of nowhere." Nowhere. NATO airspace was a distant dream. The cavalry General Wallace had promised was still 25 minutes away. They were alone, surrounded, and running out of time. Arya picked up the intercom, her voice ringing through the cabin with a confidence she didn't feel. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Major Thorne. In the next few minutes, we are going to be performing some unconventional maneuvers. This is for your safety. Please follow the crew's instructions without hesitation." She clicked off and turned to Corrigan. "On my mark, I need you to do something insane. I need you to hit the speed brakes and drop the landing gear." "At this altitude? At this speed?" Ben looked at her as if she'd lost her mind. "It could tear the wings off. The gear doors will rip right off the fuselage." "The 777 is the most over-engineered aircraft in the sky," Arya shot back. "It can take it. It'll create a wall of drag, a sudden deceleration that will throw them off. They'll overshoot us, and it will buy us a few precious minutes to reposition." Through the windshield, she watched Leo's jet. She knew him, knew his impatience. He was getting cocky, letting his wingmen fly a tight, perfect formation while he toyed with them. It was time to remind him who he was dealing with. Back in the cabin, Tanaka suddenly swore in Japanese. "They're in," he said to Rizzo. "They've breached the plane's Wi-Fi. They're trying to hack the case through the internal network." Rizzo's mind, the mind of a street-smart detective, made a leap. "Noise," he said. "We need to create electronic noise." He started shouting to the passengers around him. "Everyone, turn on your phones. Your laptops, your tablets, everything. Turn on Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, anything that has a signal." People stared at him, confused. Eleanor Vance, the elderly man next to Arya's original seat, was the first to understand. "My grandson gave me one of those portable hotspots," he said, fumbling in his bag. "Said it would work anywhere." "Turn it on," Rizzo commanded. "Create a network. Call it Free Movies." Within a minute, the cabin was flooded with a chaotic storm of electronic signals. dozens of devices screaming into the digital ether, creating a fog that would make isolating Tanaka's specific device a nightmare. The second Phantom jet had moved closer, its dark shape now visible to the passengers on the port side. The psychological pressure was immense. They were trapped, a lumbering beast flanked by two silent, circling sharks. 20 minutes until friendly contact, Ben whispered, his eyes glued to the instruments. 20 minutes. A lifetime. It was then that Arya noticed it. The second pilot, Phantom 2, flew with a rigid, almost robotic precision. Leo's flying was an art form, fluid and intuitive. This was different. It was the flying of someone who was good, but not brilliant. Someone who was following orders, not improvising. An exploitable weakness. She made her decision. She keyed the intercom. "Everyone, brace for impact. Now, this is not a drill. Heads down, brace!" The cabin erupted in fresh panic, but the Marines and flight attendants were already moving, forcing people's heads down, shouting instructions. "What are you doing?" Corrigan yelled. "Creating a distraction," Arya replied. She grabbed the radio. "Leo, we've lost a hydraulic line. We're going down." She pitched her voice with the perfect amount of controlled panic. "Nice try, Viper. I'm not buying it." "No, really," she yelled. Then to Corrigan, "Now, hit it all. Brakes and gear." Corrigan, his face a grim mask, slammed his hand down on the controls. The 777 screamed in protest. The entire airframe shuddered with a bone-jarring violence as the speed brakes deployed and the massive landing gear dropped into the 500-knot slipstream. The deceleration was brutal, throwing the pilots forward against their safety harnesses. Warning alarms blared, a symphony of electronic shrieking. Just as Arya predicted, the two Phantom jets shot past them, caught completely by surprise. Leo reacted instantly, his jet pulling a tight, high-G turn to re-engage. But the second pilot was slower. Her turn was wider, clumsier. She nearly stalled before recovering. "Gear up! Brakes in! Full throttle!" Arya roared. The 777's engines thundered back to life as Corrigan shoved the throttles to the firewall. They'd lost thousands of feet of altitude, but they had separated their enemies. They had bought themselves maybe 60 seconds. "That was fucking insane," Ben gasped, his hands shaking. "That was the overture," Arya said grimly. Leo's jet was already screaming back toward them, his rage a palpable thing. His voice on the radio was a low, murderous snarl. "Cute trick, Viper. You just cost yourself altitude, fuel, and my good humor. You're down to 20,000 feet. Keep playing games and you'll be teaching fish how to fly." He was right. The maneuver had come at a heavy price. They were lower, slower, and burning fuel at a suicidal rate. But Arya had confirmed her theory. Phantom 2 was the weak link. "Tanaka!" she yelled over her shoulder toward the cabin. "Status." 5 minutes, came the reply. "Maybe less. I'm almost done locking them out." 5 minutes. Help was still 15 minutes away. The numbers wouldn't add up. The two Phantom jets reformed on their wings. Closer this time. Suffocatingly close. They could see the weapons pods under their wings, pregnant with lethal intent. Leo waggled his wings, a fighter pilot's taunt. That's when Arya saw something else. A minute imperfection in Leo's flying. A slight hesitation as he adjusted his roll. She'd seen it 1,000 times in training. An old rotator cuff injury from a bad ejection. It only flared up when he was under extreme physical stress. "He's hurt," she whispered to Corrigan. "That high G turn. He's favoring his right arm." "How does that help us?" "It means he's compromised. His reaction time will be a few milliseconds slower, and a few milliseconds is all I need." She grabbed the radio, not talking to Ghost, but to Leo. "Hey Vance, remember that bar in Okinawa? The one where you tried to arm wrestle that Marine gunny sergeant and dislocated your shoulder? Looks like it's still bothering you. Silence. I bet that 9G turn felt like a bitch, she pressed. When he responded, his voice was pure venom. This has nothing to do with ancient history, Arya. Doesn't it? Just like the 17 civilians you murdered? Is that ancient history too? Don't, he hissed. You want to know what I did after they kicked me out, Leo? I memorized their names. All 17 of them. Aisha Khan, age 6. She wanted to be a doctor. Shut up. Her brother, Omar, age 9. I said, shut up. Leo's jet suddenly broke formation and performed a terrifying maneuver, an inverted supersonic pass directly over their cockpit. The shockwave hit them like a physical blow, shaking the 777 so violently that overhead bins burst open, raining luggage and debris down on the screaming passengers. But Arya smiled. A cold, grim smile. She had gotten under his skin. She had made him angry, and angry pilots make mistakes. Phantom 2, hold your position, Leo barked over the radio. I'm re-engaging to... He stopped mid-sentence. Arya saw it too. On the horizon, 2 tiny pinpricks of light, climbing at an impossible rate, leaving brilliant white contrails in their wake. The cavalry. And they were breaking the sound barrier to get here. 15 minutes out, Ben breathed, reading the telemetry. How is that possible? They're on full afterburner, Arya realized. They're burning every drop of fuel they have to reach us. Leo saw them too. His entire posture changed. The game was over. 10 minutes, Viper! He screamed into the radio. You have 10 minutes to give me Tanaka and the key, or I'm putting a missile right into your cockpit. You fire on us, and those F-22s will blow you out of the sky, Arya warned. Maybe, he snarled. But you'll already be dead. I have nothing left to lose, Arya. You took everything from me 6 years ago. You took it from yourself, Leo, she said softly. His jet lined up directly in front of them, a perfect firing solution. In the cabin, Tanaka suddenly slammed his briefcase shut. Done, he yelled. The key is firewalled. They can't get it, not electronically. Rizzo relayed the message to Arya. It was her last card to play. Captain, she said, patch my voice through the cabin speakers. I want everyone to hear this. Corrigan flipped a switch. Leo Vance, Arya's voice, calm and clear, filled the radio and the cabin simultaneously. This is Major Arya Thorne. I'm giving you one last chance to be the man I used to know, not the monster you've become. The man who pulled me out of a burning jet in training. The man who cried at my father's funeral. That man is still in there. Turn away, Leo. End this. The cabin was utterly silent. Every passenger, every crew member listening to this final desperate plea. Do you really believe that? Leo asked, and for the first time the anger in his voice was gone, replaced by a raw, aching pain. Do you really believe anyone can be redeemed? I have to, Arya whispered. Or else what was it all for? The seconds ticked by, each one an eternity. The incoming fighters were now visible as distinct aircraft, maybe 5 minutes out. Phantom 2 had pulled back, her pilot clearly unnerved by the approaching Raptors. Then, through the speakers, a new voice. A voice of pure, unadulterated authority. A voice that had commanded fleets and armies. General Wallace, broadcasting from one of the approaching F-22s. Ghost, this is Olympus Actual. Stand down, son. It's over. General, Leo's voice cracked. Stand down, Major Vance. That is a direct order from a superior officer. I'm not a major anymore, sir. You made sure of that? No, son. Wallace's voice was filled with a tired sadness. You did, when you chose revenge over honor. But it doesn't have to end here. Break off your attack. Land at Midway. Face the consequences like the officer you were raised to be. Arya held her breath. The entire plane held its breath. Leo's jet stayed locked on them for 10 agonizing seconds, a killer deciding whether to pull the trigger. Then, slowly, almost gracefully, it banked to the left, its nose dropping. "Phantom 2, disengage," Leo said, his voice flat, defeated. "Mission scrubbed." The second jet immediately peeled off, diving for the safety of the clouds and vanishing. But Leo's jet began a slow, circling descent. Through the windows, the passengers watched as he circled them once, then twice. He waggled his wings. Not a threat this time. A salute. A farewell. Arya's private comm crackled. It was Leo, on a frequency only the two of them knew. "I'm sorry, Viper. For all of it." Before she could respond, his jet rolled over and dove, accelerating toward the ocean below, a fallen angel disappearing into the darkness. The radar tracked him for a moment. Then the blip vanished. Not toward Midway. Straight down. The cabin didn't celebrate. It wept. A collective, shuddering release of unbearable tension. Tears of relief, of shock, of grief for a choice that didn't have to be made. The Chen children were crying again, and for the first time, their parents let their own tears fall, holding their children in a desperate, grateful embrace. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Corrigan announced, his voice thick with emotion, "we are safe. We're all safe." The two F-22 Raptors had formed up on their wings, a guard of honor to see them home. Through the cockpit window, Arya could see the pilot of the lead jet. He raised a hand in a slow, respectful salute. "General Wallace." She returned it, a gesture she hadn't made in 6 years. In that moment, she wasn't a disgrace. She wasn't a civilian. She was Major Arya Thorne, and she had done her duty. "So," Corrigan said quietly beside her. "What happens now?" Arya looked out at the first hint of dawn, a thin, purple line on the horizon. "I don't know," she said. "But for the first time in a long time, I think it's going to be okay." This story is far from over. The aftermath, the investigation, the reunion, it's a whole other journey. If you made it this far, you are a true survivor. Thank you for being here. Do me a favor and hit that subscribe button because you've earned a front row seat for what comes next. And finally, leave a comment with one word that describes how you're feeling right now. I have a feeling I know what it will be. Until next time, stay safe, and remember that heroes are often found in the most unexpected places.